Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Hatch Day Party Q&A party. I'm Sean Peterson. I'm one of the ecologists here at Cal Falcons.
And I'm Lynn Schofield, also ecologist and ornithologist. And we are here to celebrate our 4 chicks on the campanile and to answer questions that people have about them.
Yeah, and we'll start off with a question that we haven't looked at yet, but I assume we're going to get is the 4th chick going to be okay? Because it's a couple days later than its siblings. Is it going to survive?
Yes, we are getting a lot of people worried about the chick because it's smaller. But peregrine falcons, luckily, are a species that are very equal in the care that they provide their chicks, regardless of if one of the chicks is smaller or not. They grow very quickly, so the difference in size will disappear more and more through time. And we've already observed chick number 4 having its first meal recently. So we know that chick number 4 should do pretty well and should, we have no reason to be concerned about it. So yeah, hopefully that will get that worry off of people's mind.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, there are a number of species of birds where there is unequal care amongst the chicks. So you often see that in species like bald eagles, or there's some parrots that do that. But that's not something that we see in peregrine falcon. So luckily, we are hopefully going to have equal care for all the chicks.
All right, so I am looking through some questions that I'll work on posing to you. So I am seeing this question: does Archie have a pantry? It seems like he shows up to the nest and he leaves and comes back with prey right away. And Archie leaves.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. So every male that we've had has had a different place that he stores food for Annie, but they all choose a certain spot where they will stick food that Annie can then go grab whenever she or the chicks are hungry. Archie's spot, we believe, is on the outer balcony of the campanile, and he stores food there for Annie. In the past years, they've used Evans Hall or some of the other buildings on campus as their pantry. But we've even some of the times we've gone up there to kind of take care of the nest level, we've actually run into some birds stored in the pantry, and it's always pretty interesting to see what's in there.
All right, so we have this question. It's kind of part of the same discussion. What happens to the carcasses once eating is finished? And we got a good answer from the crowd, but we'll elaborate more. So they are able to eat everything. If they want to, you'll occasionally see them doing things like eating the entire foot. So they can eat pretty much every part of the bird that they hunt. They do, get calcium from the bones, get other nutrients from different parts. Although it is worth noting that if they have plenty of food, they will sometimes eat their favorite parts and leave other parts uneaten. So on a day, on a week, on a year that they have lots of food, the extras might just be around the base of the campanile, staying in the pantry and getting all over the place. So, yeah.
All right, question from Wendy. My question for the experts is, why did the first 3 eggs hatch so close together and the 4th egg hatch 2 days later? That's kind of a bit of an artifact of how incubation works and how egg development works. So the embryo inside the egg is only going to develop when it's in a very specific temperature window. If it's colder than the window, it's not going to develop. So the peregrine falcons in the first few days after the first eggs are laid are trying to keep the eggs in a window that is below development, but above getting damaged from being cold. So the first 3 eggs, they kind of try to keep in this kind of state of suspended animation. And then as soon as they hit 3 eggs, they usually incubate in earnest, where they're really trying to get as much heat into those eggs as possible. So the 3 eggs that hatched first were the first 3 eggs laid. And then the one that hatched 2 days later was the 4th egg, which was laid 2 days after the 3rd egg.
All right. And so we kind of have a question here. So did the fourth chick hatch because, something to do with Archie, because Archie's been such a strong provider since, in the past, Annie hasn't been able to, hatch all four at all. And, the year Grinnell died, there was only 2 chicks hatched. And that answer is, so it's a little bit speculative. It's hard to know exactly what was wrong with any of the chicks at, what was wrong with the eggs or not wrong with the eggs when they didn't hatch. Many of the times it appeared to be that the eggs had cracked in some way before the hatch date, and so just were unable to develop at all, which that wouldn't be related to the male and the fitness of the male one way or another. And that actually could relate more to some physiology with Annie, some sort of toxin or pesticide or lack of nutrient she was getting. So my guess is that it is not specifically about Archie that the 4th egg has hatched, but it does indicate that Archie has been doing a good job of providing that, she was able to lay 4, that the 4 were able to be incubated fully and properly with nothing going wrong. So definitely shows that Archie has been a good provider, but doesn't necessarily reflect on the other males that they weren't.
Yeah, and a follow-up question here. Does this say anything about Annie's health? It's possible. I mean, it's possible that what was driving this kind of egg breakage that we were seeing in the previous 7 years or so, 6 years, was something that was a short-term environmental toxin or something that was weakening eggshells, short-term. It also could just be chance that we happened to have a year where the eggshells were thick enough and they didn't get damaged.
All right. And now here we have a good general question. What sort of species are peregrine falcons predating on in the West Coast? Because peregrine falcons have a worldwide distribution, so different parts of the world, they're eating different stuff. But the answer for peregrine falcons on the West Coast is about the same as you'd find in many other parts of the world, which is just about any bird at all. They have been recorded hunting everything from sandhill crane down to ruby-throated hummingbird. Annie specifically is a bit of an urban bird herself, and she primarily is seen hunting pigeons, while Archie has been bringing a larger variety of stuff, including blackbirds, shorebirds, robins, quite a few robins.
Starlings,
yeah.
Yeah, there's a really interesting pattern in peregrine falcons and a lot of raptors where the male is quite a bit smaller than the female. And one of the reasons why that may be the case is that they are kind of partitioning their food sources so that they're not competing with each other. So Annie is only going after larger birds to eat, and Archie is going after smaller birds generally.
All right, so here's kind of an interesting one, just as how do they ensure that they're not crushing the chicks when they're sitting on them?
It's a really good question, and you can actually see what they're doing right now on the screen. Annie's the front part of Annie's wing, which is effectively the wrist of on a human, is actually kind of holding up part of their body weight. So they're actually more crouching on top of the eggs, while holding up their body weight with their wings and legs, than putting all of their body weight on the chicks. So they're kind of forming this nice fluffy tunnel of feathers and warmth under there, while kind of crouching over the nest.
Yeah, and it is also worth noting that as dense as a peregrine falcon looks, they actually don't weigh very much. It's 1 to 2 pounds realistically. So it is not as much peregrine falcon mass as it comes off looking a lot of the time. And now here's a good question. How are we telling the difference between Annie and Archie by sight? Because we are, looking at a, bluish gray bird with a helmet. How do we know which is which?
Yeah, this is a really good question. When Grinnell was the male at the nest, it was super easy because Grinnell had bands and Annie did. And then when Alden came in, it was super easy because Alden had a limp, and then Annie didn't. And then it got harder with Lou and now with Archie. So Archie luckily has a couple of little feather characteristics and coloration characteristics that make it not easy, but at least possible to identify the two. So Archie has much yellower skin. It's not as extreme as Lou's Cheeto feet, his famous Cheeto feet, but he does have pretty bright yellow skin on his legs and around his bill. And then he's got above his bill some really pale feathers, kind of like a white wash coming out from his bill, which Annie does not. And I think that makes it that's one thing you can look for. Another thing that you can kind of give a sense of over time is just size. Annie is she's big and she's kind of bulky. She kind of stomps around a little bit, and Archie behaviorally he kind of more bounces around. He's a little bit lighter. You can tell that he's kind of a little bit more slight.
Yeah, one of the features that I find kind of distinct for Archie is that the yellow area in front of the eye, the skin part, seems to be rather larger on Archie than on a lot of other falcons, and so that gives his face a little bit of a different look.
Okay. Let's see.
All right.
Oh,
here's one, and this is going to be one of the many questions where the answer is we don't really know. But how old do we think Archie is?
So the way we measure age in birds is when they are hatched, that's their first year. And then the next year is their second year. And then we use calendar years to determine that. Peregrine falcons won't grow their full steely gray adult plumage until late in the summer of their second year. So when we saw him for the first time in January, he had those feathers. So at that point, we knew he must be at least in his third year, as counting was from 1, 2, 3. But we don't know anything beyond that. He could be old. He's probably more likely to be pretty young. Most older birds, if they have a successful territories, tend to stay there. But it's possible he could be a displaced bird from an older territory.
Yeah, and here's one very specific about Annie that is just a speculation. So Annie seems very accepting of Archie hanging out in the nest a lot more than it felt like she was with Lou, in my opinion. Yeah. Any speculation about why Annie's been so accepting of Archie?
You know, one of the really fun things about this kind of nest camera is that we're able to see the differences in behavior between all sorts of different individuals. And peregrine falcons have very distinct personalities. And I think Archie likes to be in the nest box more than some of the other males. So maybe it's not Annie is letting him stay there as much as he is interested in being there. So that's kind of my hot take. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I think it really is that Archie is apparently proving competence and Annie is accepting it. And hang on, I just want to go with this one.
I was going to go for the same.
So back to diet of, they took a hawk, didn't they? Yes, they did. They have eaten multiple kinds of hawks. Annie has been seen with red-shouldered hawks, Cooper's hawks, and sharp-shinned hawks. And then what about a pelican? So Annie and Archie specifically, no, none of the campanile birds have, but they have been recorded eating pelicans, and it is Annie's offspring, Larry, may have taken pelicans before.
Yeah, Larry, we know Larry has taken a Canada goose, which is a giant bird. And so Larry has really done some pretty epic stuff as a peregrine falcon.
Yeah. And so then kind of a question, the food already looks prepped when Annie comes back to the nest. Is Archie prepping the food?
Yeah, in a lot of cases he is. He is plucking the food, getting it ready. You'll notice that especially at this age, Annie will be bringing morsels of food pretty regularly, maybe every few hours. And so she'll often, feed the chicks and then put that morsel away and then bring it back. So yeah, they'll often be eating from the same bird throughout the day.
All right, and then just peregrine falcon eggs. How big are they relative to a chicken egg?
They are almost exactly the same size as an average chicken egg. They're yeah, I was looking up the numbers the other day for someone had asked, and they're almost identical in size to a chicken egg.
Yeah, we used to have, well, I think they're still there. We used to have rulers on the edges of the nest box so you could try to get a sense of size, but those have since gotten very dirty and poop colored.
Someone keeps pooping on them. I don't know who.
I don't know where that poop's coming from.
It's a mystery.
And then here's a question we kind of get a lot, and just, do we know where Alden or Lou are?
The short answer is no, we don't. Unfortunately, neither of those males were banded. So even if they showed up somewhere, either alive or dead, we would never know it was them because there's no identifier. I think the most likely scenario for Alden and Lou is that they probably have died, and most likely due to bird flu, avian influenza, which has been hitting especially raptors in the Bay Area very hard. It's a really rough disease, and it's nearly 100% lethal in raptors, and it's carried by shorebirds. So those were some of the main food sources in both Alden and Lou. So that's why we kind of worry that they were more likely to be exposed to that disease.
All right, and here we have a bird biology question. How can the parents tell if the chicks need a feed? And Linda brings up is it the color of the month? So it is true for many species that there's actually a very clear indication of whether or not a chick needs food by the color of the inside of the mouth. For peregrine falcons, there isn't a super obvious change in coloration. But more or less, peregrine falcon parents will keep putting in food to whichever chicks are opening their mouth in front of them, and they will attempt to keep doing it as much as possible. And it seems that they do have the ability to kind of keep track of which ones are more in need of food than others. And there is it's slightly redder for hungrier chicks.
Yep.
So it's a subtle cue, but I think it's a lot more of a behavioral cue, just the behavior of the chicks, and that they can apparently tell which one from the others.
All right, Lynn. Annie is sitting on a pile of rocks. Why does that nest box have so many rocks in it?
So full disclosure, we did put those specific rocks into the nest box. We put those rocks there. So the natural type of nest peregrine falcons make is what is referred to as a scrape. And it's referred to as a scrape because literally they find a rocky ledge and scrape a little bit of a depression into the rocky ledge to lay the eggs on. And so this is trying to mimic as best we can what they recognize as a favorable nest. When Annie first arrived, she was just trying to lay eggs on the bare concrete and some broken sandbags at the top of the tower. And so we put in the nest box with the rocks in it to provide a more suitable space for the eggs to be laid.
All right. Have any of the fledged chicks of yesteryears been sighted this season? So yes, we have had three chicks that have been re-sighted since they left their parents' territory in total. The first was Laurentium, aka Larry, who has been very, very successful out on Alcatraz and has produced many broods of grandbabies for Annie, grand chicks for Annie. Then we have had sightings of Sequoia down in San Jose, who has been missing for about a year now, but he was in San Jose for a little while. And then one of last year's chicks was resighted this fall near Vallejo. And that was pretty exciting. We don't know if he's going to set up a territory. That was Zephyr. Sorry, I forgot to mention that part. If he's going to set up a territory there, or if he was just kind of hanging out as he was exploring the world. But it was really nice to get a sighting of him.
Yeah, and just worth mentioning that Larry, who's the one nesting on Alcatraz, she's still going strong. She has chicks this season as well that hatched about a week or so before Annie and Archie's chicks have. And there will hopefully be a public webcam so you can check out what Larry is up to season pretty soon, although they have very difficult information technology and communications issues since they are in the middle of an island that does not have a lot of infrastructure, but hopefully we'll get to see that soon.
All right. Oh, sorry. When will the babies be named and banded? This is a really good question, and I think that there's a biological answer here in that the legs of a peregrine falcon are one of the first things to get to full size, and so that's what matters in being able to band the chicks. That's kind of the minimum cutoff for when you're able to band the chicks, is when the legs are full size. But you don't want the peregrine falcon, the baby peregrine falcon, to be big enough where it's going to start running away from you when you get up to the nest box. It's just not safe for anyone involved to have the chicks scampering around. So you want to hit this gap between they're big enough that you can put a band on and not big enough that they're going to run away when you get there. So we are thinking roughly, and this hasn't been like fully confirmed yet, but May 15th will be banding day. Plus we'll kick off the naming contest then, because then we'll know all the chicks are doing well, and the sexes of all the chicks as well.
All right. I'm kind of thinking, well, okay, so I have here, I'm going to give you a difficult question to spend some time on while I go through and look at some of the questions further on. So, big biology question. Why are some birds aggressive towards their siblings and others not?
This is a really good question. And it comes down to kind of evolutionary trade-offs. There are benefits and costs to having siblings. And in some species, there are relatively limited food supplies available, so they need to really compete for those resources to grow to full size and succeed. In other species where there's more plentiful resources, there doesn't need to be competition. And so the benefits of having siblings outweighs the kind of cost of competition for parental care. For peregrine falcons, they typically don't have more chicks than they can handle, that they can care for. In the high Arctic areas of the world where they nest, they have a much lower clutch size than here in the Bay Area where there's plentiful food. So they kind of set this level of what they think they can care for, and that's how many chicks they'll produce. And so that way they're not having to kind of have the chicks compete for resources. So that's why some species you have that competition, and in many you don't.
All right, so here's a easier question for you. What happens to the eggshells?
Great question. Some of them get eaten. You'll see Annie nibble on the eggs a little bit. That's just a way for her to get some of that calcium back. They do get calcium into the eggshells by leaching it out of their bones. So technically Annie is kind of weakening her bones every single time she lays an egg, but it's not excessively, like it's not a danger or anything, and it's not necessary for them to eat their eggshells. Otherwise you would see them do it all the time. So sometimes she'll nibble on it, get a little bit of extra calcium. Most of the time though, the eggshells just kind of get crushed as the chicks start moving around the nest, and they kind of break on their own.
All right, here's a question that I have a one-word answer for. Yes.
Yes.
I would love that.
100%. That would be amazing.
Yes, a Lego brick set based on the birds would be a delightful idea. And so if anybody has that skill set and wants to submit something to the Lego ideas, I'd encourage that.
Yeah.
I'd sign off on it.
We would blast that GoFundMe thing all over our social media.
Yep. Okay, so this is an interesting biology question. At what age will Annie be expected to stop laying eggs and raising young? And the reason this is an interesting biology question is because there's a lot of, we don't really know with birds when it comes to, what happens when they start declining in fertility through time. So there is a well-known albatross named Wisdom, who is the oldest recorded bird, and she is in her 70s currently, because she was banded in the 1950s. And Wisdom the albatross is continuing to lay eggs after all of that age, and she is showing no signs of declining in fertility.
Yeah.
And while a peregrine falcon doesn't have a lifespan like that of an albatross, it appears to be that it's a similar level of the falcons maintain fertility for a much longer proportion of their life and only really start losing it very, very late on. And so I think it is really rarely observed that a bird would be losing fertility before the point in time where other things are happening that would otherwise be preventing them from reproducing. By the time a bird would be declining in fertility, they also would be struggling to hunt, struggling to find mates, struggling to do a lot of other things. So
yeah, I think there's only been a few documented cases of menopause in female birds, and it's almost all in captive reared parrots, because parrots live forever. And so they can get to that age, and if they're cared for well, they can get to that age where they would exhibit those signs of infertility.
All right, here's a question. So at night, Annie is typically on the nest, and where is Archie?
I don't know if we know where Archie's nighttime sleeping spot is. It's almost certainly on the campanile. I know he likes to perch on the decorative stonework garland underneath the tower, like the ledges on the tower. But he is, I don't know if we know exactly where he likes to sleep. It's going to be close to the nest because he's always there to keep an ear out. But yeah, we'll have to have someone kind of look for where he likes to spend the night.
All right. And this has come up, and this is going to be one more time. Okay. So we have genetic samples taken from the chicks that were hatched the year that Grinnell passed and Alden ended up on the territory. And are there results of those genetic tests yet?
Nope.
Unfortunately, the answer is still no. So the genetic samples were taken as part of a much greater study of the kind of genetic relationships and population change and stuff throughout the Bay Area. And so because this is part of a larger study and it's somebody's, doctoral work, the collecting of samples is happening through time, and then samples are going to be, kind of analyzed once they are, in the large group for this project. So unfortunately, yes, we will find out one of these days, but no, our falcons' genetic samples are not being treated with, greater priority versus other falcons, as much as it feels like perhaps
we all want to know, but
we all want to know. It's just these things will happen when they happen, and I'm excited to find out too. But you can't rush science. All right. Can peregrine falcons recognize their adult offspring?
That is a great question. And that's one. Animal behavior questions are really difficult to answer because we can't go ask them. What we can look at is their behavior, and if there's any kind of evidence that they are recognizing their grown offspring. From what people have seen when peregrines interact with grown offspring, they tend to just treat them as other adults and chase them away. That said, there have been a couple of cameras, and I think there's one this year somewhere in Europe, that have documented second-year chicks returning to the natal territory and helping out their parents. So that would indicate that, yeah, they can recognize their previous offspring and tolerate them. It's something that I guess we haven't seen much of that interaction around, because, I mean, peregrine falcon populations haven't risen to the point where you'd see that much interaction between parents and offspring until relatively recently. So maybe we'll get some more evidence about that in the near future.
All right, here's just a general question that has come up. So when we go up, will we be able to get the lighting fixed or the cameras cleaned off or all of this other stuff and maintenance? And I've also seen some questions about like how and when is maintenance done, as far as, you know, just the mess up there and everything else.
Yeah, kind of no. We will probably have enough time to wipe off the cameras and get those kind of cleaned up a little bit. But our goal in banding the chicks is to absolutely minimize the amount of time that we are there. And so we won't really be doing any sort of maintenance activities while we're up there.
But later on, once all the chicks have fledged in the winter, when Annie and Archie would be spending the most time away from the campaniles, when people do go up to do some amount of cleaning to get rid of, you know, any of the stuff that would be clogging the drains up there. And we're also hoping to perhaps get some improvements to the cams themselves.
Yeah, well,
so
we're
but
trying to figure that out.
that is something for later.
Are there environmental factors that determine how many chicks will hatch each year? Yes and no. So peregrine falcons do have some control over how many eggs they lay, and they might base how many eggs they lay on what food availability is like, and then also the weather. And then weather can play a really big factor in how many eggs are hatching, because if an egg gets too cold, it's not going to develop right and not hatch. So, or too hot, if it gets way too hot. So if the weather is incorrect, then we can definitely have an impact on the number of eggs that hatch.
All right. And then here's just a behavioral observation that Fiona here made. When they feed the chicks, they seem to dangle the food into their mouths before pulling it back, sometimes alternating between chicks, until finally giving a morsel to one. Why is this?
That's a good question. I'm not sure if I have a great answer or an answer where I know it. But I think in some cases, Annie pulls a morsel of meat, and maybe it has some bone attached to it or something, and they're going to try to avoid giving those bones to the chick, especially when they're young. So maybe she pulls it out then. She also seems to be trying to really get the right angle to get the food into the chick's mouth, and so maybe she doesn't like quite how it's going in there. I don't know. Do you have any other thoughts on why she does that?
No, I really don't know. A lot of these behavior things, you'd think with how much time people spend watching the peregrine falcons, that all of these behavior things would be completely clear, but we still don't exactly know what, you know, that is. They're probably somehow assessing which chick should get the food in that moment and which chick is ready to have that food put into their little mouths. Now here's a question that I should know the answer to, and I don't, because there is an estimate. How many peregrine falcons are we thinking live in the Bay Area? I
asked Zika Glux, Dr. Zika Glux, who runs the Santa Cruz Predatory Bird Research Group, out of UC Santa Cruz, and they do all of the peregrine falcon banding and monitoring in the Bay Area. I asked her what her estimate was, and I think she said something around 40 pairs.
Yeah.
So it's, I think, in the neighborhood of 40 pairs-ish, with kind of some fluctuations, and it's, you know, obviously been increasing over time.
And it's worth noting 40 pairs means 40
breeding pairs
of birds, and that means there are lots of others that are not actively holding a territory in the Bay Area, despite being present, but they are difficult to count. And then here's a question that kind of comes up a bit, because are these birds unusual in that they eat other birds? Because I know a lot of people are like, oh my gosh, it's like cannibalism. But this is just my opportunity to mention kind of a general bird biology fact that, so number one, no, there are a lot of other species of birds that also eat other birds. Many species of falcons are adapted for that. Accipiters that are the forest hawks, like Cooper's hawks and sharp-shinned hawks, they're adapted for that. The red-shouldered hawks that you see all over the place, if you're in the Bay Area, Golden Gate Park, they're bird eaters. But just to kind of go to, again, a lot of people are like, oh my gosh, it's like cannibalism. But actually, birds are a really large group. There's 10,000 species, and it is more akin to, is it odd that mammals eat other mammals? And no, there isn't, that much relationship. Although, again, maybe it is interesting that they will eat even other relatively closely related raptors to themselves. But yeah, so no, it's not totally unique, although peregrine falcons are probably the best specialized for hunting birds in many ways, just with the incredible speed and agility that they have.
You get a nice view of the pile of chicks.
Aw, it's all 4. You can barely count them. I think this is a good question, and it's a good question because this is one that we don't necessarily know the answer to broadly. How far off do the offspring migrate for territory? And look, we get to see some of that nicely prepared food that Archie has brought in.
Yeah, so this is again a situation where Annie has just kind of walked off screen to the pantry and has grabbed a piece of pigeon or something for the chicks to feed. But this question is it's a really good question, and it's one of the kind of really big black boxes of unknowns in bird biology is dispersal of young birds to new territories and new space. And it's clouded a little bit by where we look for birds. So what we know about like Annie's offspring is that all of the ones that we've seen are in the Bay Area, but that doesn't mean that they're limited to the Bay Area. That means that's
it fell over.
That's where we're looking for them. The farthest distance that I think a juvenile has been known to disperse is on the order of like 500 miles or so. But again, that's still just the one that we happen to find. So there's kind of a technology gap in what we're able to do and how we're able to kind of answer that question of where they go. So hopefully we'll know someday, but right now we don't know the full answer.
Yeah, because peregrine falcon migratory abilities between a summer territory and a winter territory, that can be thousands of miles for, northern individuals nesting in, northern Canada might fly all the way to South America for their wintering grounds. So they're perfectly capable of going as far as they want to find a nesting territory. But typically they do look for new territories closer to their original home, just out of, familiarity with the general region. But yeah, it's probably many hundreds of miles is definitely possible, more probably possible, and has probably happened, but we don't know.
All right. Why don't they ever need to drink water? As Lynn takes a drink of water. I'm going to try to move the cat. So a lot of birds, especially predatory birds, get a lot of their water from the food that they eat. Meat has a very high frequency of water, and it is so they get a lot of water that way. They can also get water from breaking down carbohydrates into their constituent parts and components, and they get water metabolically. Peregrine falcons do occasionally drink water from a water source, so it's not unheard of, but really most of their water needs come from the food that they eat.
All right, and here's just, is there a Disney movie in the works about Annie and Archie? We did an April Fool's, but it is April Fool's we would like to see happen in real life. Pixar, I think the story of Annie and Alden, the father who stepped in and helped raise some chicks, I think there's some good material for a movie there, right?
Yeah. Sorry if we tricked anyone. We
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So then the question is: someone manually monitoring and moving the nest cams to track the movements? And yes.
Yep, it is all volunteers. We've got a stable of really awesome volunteers who drive the cameras, and it's really amazing to see all of their hard work in kind of keeping the cameras active. So just know that whenever you see the camera moving, that's because someone is driving that camera.
All right, here's a question specifically for us. What kind of degrees do we have? Do we have the authority to answer Falcon questions?
Let's see. I have a Bachelor of Arts in Biology from McAllister College and a Master of Science in Natural Resources Science and Management from the University of Minnesota, and my PhD in Environmental Science Policy and Management from UC Berkeley.
Yep, and that's really what I was giving you as the answer to. Shout out, his bird science degree does come from Berkeley itself, and my bird science degree is from Eastern Illinois. Yeah, so are the eggs all fertilized at the same time?
They are not. It's actually a really interesting system. So if you think about how mammals work, everything gets fertilized at the same time and grows at the same time. With birds, it's like a conveyor belt. So all of the ovaries are developing the embryos and the eggs, and they kind of are developing at different stages. And as they get to a certain point, they're released into the oviduct, they become fertilized, they move through the oviduct, get all of the material in the egg, so the albumin, the egg white, the yolk, all of that other stuff, and then are shelled in this kind of conveyor belt process. So as the egg gets to the end, the next egg is getting to be the big size where it's going to be fertilized and then move through. It takes probably about 2 days roughly for the whole process to work. So it is possible in many instances that different sperm from different partners could fertilize different eggs. It's not common in peregrines. There's actually never been any recorded extra pair paternity in peregrines, but a lot of other birds,
Really?
Especially small sun. Yeah, I was surprised too.
Because a quarter of bluebirds or more
a lot of
extra pair paternity anyways.
Songbirds have tons of extra pair paternity. It's kind of a bit of a free-for-all. It's more of like a social monogamy that they have than kind of a reproductive monogamy.
That's songbirds. Anyway, Sorry I took a digression because I'm so used to it being very common in songbirds to have fathers that are not the socially monogamous father in a pair, but so I guess peregrine falcons, they really are no instances of that.
No, not
being
recorded.
Observed.
All right. Do they cast pellets like some other raptors? Yes, they do. And you can actually see a couple of videos on our YouTube channel of them casting pellets. So if you are not familiar with what a pellet is, so birds have a really strong stomach and are really capable of digesting a lot of things. But if you look in their mouth, they don't have any teeth. So they have no way to kind of crush their food, break it down into smaller parts. And that's what the pellet is effectively doing. Is like they're eating everything and then digesting what they can and then horking up the rest. And the pellet is all the stuff that they can't digest. So it's the bones, it's the feathers, it's the fur, it's all of the stuff that they can't digest.
how hard it is to get all 4 under there.
I know, it's going to be hilarious in like a week when she's trying to fit all 4 giant chicks underneath her.
All right. So, and we touched on this. So do then falcons and raptors fly south for the winter, or do they stay on their territory? And for peregrine falcons, the answer is depends on the falcon. Annie and presumably Archie are both sedentary in the sense that they do not migrate. The Bay Area weather is very mild, perfectly nice for a peregrine falcon to stay around all year, and they have a food supply all year, so they are non-migratory. But in other parts of their range, they migrate, and depending on the climate, they might migrate a very significant distance. As I alluded to, some of the birds that nest in northern Canada are flying thousands of miles south in order to find wintering homes in South America. And there are many species of migratory raptors, and most familiar North American species of raptors are migratory to some extent, at least. But similar to peregrine falcons, they're migratory to the extent that they will often stay on territories in mild climates where they do not need to live, with a few exceptions of like Swainson's hawks, where every single individual all migrates to the same portion of South America. And Sean needs to go. Sean needs to go take a moment to answer some questions from our kids. So I'm going to be awkwardly trying to read questions and answer them in the same way. There, we can say nice things. Dr. Peterson is in fact a professor at St. Olaf College in Minnesota these days. So I agree. I think he is very interesting. There, I'll take that back now that he's back, but yeah. Oh, look, back to this. Cal Falcons video game? Yes, I'd sign off on that too.
Yeah. It would be like Oregon Trail or something. Or like, I don't know.
Let's see. Let's see. Here's speculating about.
Do we think Annie is amazed she has 4 babies? I don't know if Annie has ever showed amazement at anything. She seems totally unflappable and imperturbable. She is yeah, she is just rock solid.
All right. So here's a pretty interesting question. And how long does it take for them to hunt for food? Do they spend a lot of time waiting for prey? And so their hunting style is very different from what I think for many people, the most familiar raptor you see is the red-tailed hawk, because they spend a lot of time perched on like street lights that you'll see them on fence posts and along the highway. And their hunting style really is to just sit and wait until something conveniently moves below them. And so they can spend hours and hours just sitting and watching for prey. So they spend a very long time hunting. Peregrine falcons, on the other hand, are very active hunters, and they are, flying up very high and looking for opportunities of birds, in flight to dive bomb on. And so similarly, they are waiting for the right opportunities, but it is a much quicker process. They're, they're going out and seeing what they can see and making an attempt much quicker. So I can't give you a great time span, but they are an active hunter. They're not spending hours and hours just sitting and waiting for prey, but it can take them multiple attempts to be able to get their prey properly because, as it happens, pigeons and shorebirds and other birds are also very fast, not as fast as a falcon in a dive, but able to maneuver. So it can take them a very long time to hunt for food, but each foray of hunting, each hunting attempt is much quicker than it is in many other species of raptor.
All right. I really like this question. It's a really, I think, interesting question. Do you know when in the gestational time is sex determined? Is it affected by environmental factors? So sex in birds is determined chromosomally, same way as with most mammals. But it's flipped in birds. So in mammals, if you have an X and a Y chromosomes for your sex chromosomes, if they're different, you have you're a male. If you have the same sex chromosome, 2X chromosomes, you're a female. If in birds, if you have they have a Z and a W chromosome for their sex chromosomes. If you have a Z and a W, you are a female, so two different ones. And if you have two Z's, you're a male. So it's still chromosomally determined. And there are not really environmental factors that I know of that will affect the sex of the chicks. I think it's just entirely chromosomal.
Yeah, which this question, it's being asked if it's affected by environmental factors, because there are some species, like, for example, crocodiles, it depends on what temperature the eggs are at, what sex they're going to develop into. But yeah, bird sex is determined in a way more similar to mammals. And now I'm going to go off on another silly one. But so I can actually give one of my PSAs that I like to give. So we have our cat on our live stream about birds. That is Saturn, and he is a house cat. He stays indoors, and it is because the greatest cause of direct mortality of birds is a highly efficient invasive predator that have been introduced by humans, and that is cats. There is a lot of mortality associated with cats outdoors and birds. So this is just, if you adopt a cat and you are able, what is safer for birds and safer for the cats is to be indoor cats. But I do love cats.
Yeah.
I think they are great pets.
All right. Well, there we go. Can you tell us more about potential predators? It seems like the chicks are pretty safe in the nest at this location, and they really are. And this is why we see peregrines nesting in these kinds of places. It's because they're incredibly inaccessible to predators. They don't have to worry about a raccoon like kind of wandering up to the nest and just slurping all the eggs into their mouth. They are protected from a lot of dangers. There are a couple of threats that they still have to worry about. One of the major ones is great horned owls, which have been known to take chicks out of nests. There have been some videos from some nest cams of great horned owls taking chicks. Most of the other predators are not a big risk. Crows can be a risk.
And ravens
They'll go for eggs.
Are a threat. They will go for eggs. They'll go for the chicks, and they'll also be aggressive towards the chicks as they're trying to fledge. So crows and ravens are a potential predator. If the site were more accessible from other parts of land, things like raccoons are very common predators of bird nests generally, and will predate peregrine falcon chicks as well.
Do all the chicks get fed equally? Sometimes in the past, it seems, I'm assuming like, the full question is, sometimes it seems like some chicks were not getting fed or not fed or fed much less than others. The parents are very, very good at equitably distributing food and making sure everyone is fed. And we kind of mentioned that there are a number of cues that they use to determine this. There's always a chance that a chick is not going to eat very well, is not going to be healthy, and can die. I mean, we're not going to pretend that like they're immortal up there or invincible up there. But for the most part, they are very good about making sure everyone is getting the food they need. What's interesting about peregrines and a lot of other species is that they have a lot of feedings where not necessarily every chick is getting fed. And that's because maybe that chick doesn't need to eat for breakfast, but will eat for lunch. So if you see a chick miss a feeding, don't worry too much. It's very likely to get fed on the next feeding.
All right. And I guess I went past the question, but this is pertinent to another question I saw, which is, so how likely is it, now that there are 4 hatched eggs, that we are going to see 4 chicks successfully fledging?
High. It's very high, but it is not 100%. I mean, there's always a risk that there will be some disease or developmental issue or something something will go wrong. But typically, they don't have to worry as much about predation, and chicks generally do pretty well in the nest. The real dangers for peregrine falcons come after they leave the nest, and especially after they leave their parents' territory. There is a very high mortality rate in the first year of life. About 50% of the chicks just won't make it to their first birthday. So it's a pretty hard time out there for peregrine when they're kind of just learning how to get through the world.
All right, and here's a comment on a behavioral observation that we were seeing early in the stream. The pebble eating, does it help with digestion? Why do we keep seeing birds eating pebbles?
Yeah, so like I had kind of mentioned earlier, birds don't have teeth. Oh, big shocker. Sorry if anybody didn't know that. But they don't have teeth. They can't chew their food. So they eat pebbles as a way of chewing their food. The pebbles are stored inside their digestive tract and kind of are crushed up in this muscular organ and strip the meat from the bone. If they eat meat that's still attached to the bone, breaks up that meat into small pieces that can be easily digested. So yes, the pebbles are an essential part of digestion. They actually have a really cool name. They're called gastroliths. So you can always impress your friends at a party with that fun fact.
Okay, and then so by extension on that, with some of this digestion stuff. Oh, I know there was another one that they asked. So the adults are eating their gastroliths and eating pebbles to help with their digestion. And the question I'm missing was, what about the chicks? Are the adults going to feed them pebbles, or are they going to end up feeding themselves pebbles at some point?
That's a really good question.
Yeah. And so
what I can say is that for the first 10 days or so, Annie is incredibly careful about feeding the chicks just little morsels of meat. So they don't need the gastroliths to break up the bigger pieces and harder pieces. I don't know when they start eating those. Do you?
No, I don't.
You've stumped us.
Yep, you've stumped us. And now here's one that's kind of would it be possible to domesticate peregrine falcons? And the answer on that is a yes and a no. So
yes with an if, no with a but.
Yes, definitely a yes with an if, no with a but. So peregrine falcons have been used in the sport of falconry for thousands of years. They have been a favored hunting companion for people. And so peregrine falcons can be trained for hunting with pretty extreme levels of dedication. But those birds will never truly be a domestic bird. Those birds, although they can be trained for hunting, they remain with people because people are very useful to them. Because people help to flush out prey, people help to take care of prey if they get something that is too large for them to take somewhere. And so it is an advantageous relationship for the falcon. They know that they will definitely get a meal every day if they're working with a human, but a falconry bird can also leave if it is being used for falconry. So they never really become domesticated, but there is some partnership that has existed, that does exist still. And there's a lot of interesting history tied up with falconry and how that's been practiced. And also, interestingly, it is falconers who hunted with peregrine falcons that were able to help with the major falcon reintroduction efforts that had to take place in the 70s and 80s to bring the species back. So no, they can't really be domesticated, but yes, people do have a relationship with them and have had a relationship for a long time.
All right. I noticed in the first few hours the chicks weren't fed and were just brooded by Annie. Is that how it normally goes? And is it due to the chicks still having nutrients from the egg? You kind of nailed it right there. That is a very typical behavior. You often don't see the chicks fed for sometimes as much as 24 hours after they hatch. Hatching takes a lot of effort for those chicks. They kind of get wiped out, so they really need to rest afterwards, and they don't need to eat immediately because they still have a ton of nutrients and material from the egg. You could actually, it's actually kind of interesting if you go to, we clipped one of the videos where the fourth chick is still wet from the egg and still kind of very brand new, while the other three are being fed. And you can see in the background of that video the brand new fourth chick poop. So it hadn't eaten yet at all, but its digestive tract is working and still kind of producing feces from the material that it had from the egg.
All right, and a foray back to kind of the bringing up falconry. This is a good point. Just good to mention things like the Migratory Bird Act, and trying to make falcons pets. To have a falconry bird is a very, very high bar to cross. There is apprenticeship and substantial amount of permitting and checking of facilities and training that you need to undergo, because they don't make good pets, because there is a lot of work into training a bird to be a falconry bird. And it is, not legal to own or keep a falcon as a pet in any normal circumstances. And I very much want to emphasize that this is not something you should think about doing or having a falcon as anything you could do lightly without getting that information and knowledge and finding, an actual master to teach you these things.
Yeah, along with pretty much every other bird species in America, they're very strongly protected by law. You can't just go catch a wild bird and have it as a pet. That is illegal and pretty bad for the individual and the species. The reason why we have the Migratory Bird Act at all is because people were heavily collecting feathers and eggs from bird nests and birds, and were just decimating populations of birds because they wanted to make pretty things with eggs and feathers. So they're very strongly protected because they have a tendency to be kind of wiped out.
Yeah. And now kind of a question in this vein. So do peregrine falcons have a native original homeland? They're all over the globe now, but were they spread by people far from their native range, like happens to, for example, Eurasian starlings? And the answer is their native range is essentially worldwide. Falcons are very good at dispersing. Again, we only know of birds that have dispersed, a few hundred miles of birds that have been banded. But throughout the history of peregrine falcons, they have had no difficulty in being able to disperse into any new possible habitat that is available to them, because they have the ability to use habitats all over the world, and they have the ability to reach habitats all over the world. And there is, clear genetic evidence of the relationship between peregrine falcons in different parts of the world, that they, dispersed, and those populations were established long before people would be interacting with the falcons.
All right, so I think this is our last question, because we need to finish before our very exceptionally patient 5-year-old turns into a pumpkin. But is there any way to support Cal Falcons, donations, etc.? First of all, I want to say tremendous thank you to every single person who's volunteered with us, supports us in every way. I mean, we really could not do anything without all of you. The amount of effort that went into the Hatch Day party today was phenomenal, and I think it really, we really need to just give a shout out to everyone who worked on that. If you want to support us, a great way is by buying a T-shirt, which we'll have Lynn demonstrate.
Yeah. So this is this year's Cal Falcons T-shirt, Make Way for Falcons, inspired by the classic Robert McCloskey children's book, Make Way for Ducklings.
I've got last year's on, the front pack backpack Falcon falcon.
Yeah, so that's the main source of funding that we're getting to be able to just do all this stuff with maintaining the cams and the equipment, and being able to plan stuff like the events. And we're also using the funds to help support
Education
research stuff, some small donations to things like Berkeley Public Library. Some of it's going to the University of Santa Cruz's Predatory Bird Research Group, which are the ones that are doing, a lot of the research and monitoring of the falcons Bay Area wide. So the t-shirts are our main funding source. You can also donate on our page itself if you just wanted to donate a little bit of money to the Falcon project.
calfalcons.berkeley.edu. Otherwise, supporting the Santa Cruz Predatory Bird Research Group is a great way to support peregrine conservation in the Bay Area, as well as wildlife rehab facilities such as Lindsay Wildlife. They're great places to help kind of conservation goals. But with that, I think we're going to sign off. Thank all of you for attending. If you have other questions, please don't hesitate to ask us on social media. We will try to answer as much as we can, and we'll probably do another one of these. We'll do one around banding, and we'll probably do one around fledged. So we've got a couple more opportunities.
All right. Thank you guys so much, and good night.